I'm Molly, and I am the Health and Wellbeing Officer for Mid Ulster Pride. And yeah, this is Josh.
Hello, I'm Josh. I'm the chairperson of Mid Ulster Pride, and we're here to talk to you about some rural LGBT issues and LGBT issues in Northern Ireland in general.
Tell us a bit about your organisation.
Well, I had found out about Mid Ulster Pride by Andrew Broading, the Reverend, because I had seen what he had been doing at Pride with regards to saying, you know, I'm sorry for how the church has treated you, and that kind of really made me want to be like, who is this guy? And I went to his house, and then he was like, oh, you must stay for the Mid Ulster Pride Committee meeting. And so then that was me roped into it. Not entirely, little me who was oblivious to this. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll stay. And then they're like, okay, so you're on the committee now. And I was like, what? But yeah, we started, there had been a group before us called Just Love, which was more for people who were, you know, straight.
Allies.
And very, very good allies. All brilliant people. And Andrew had seen Jonathan write a letter into the newspaper saying about how Dungannon and Mid Ulster should have something like Belfast and Foyle and Newry, and
That's Jonathan Campbell, the first chairperson.
so he was kind of took the initiative. Well, Andrew being Andrew was like, oh, I must get in touch with him, and we were like, okay. And from there, we recently had our 1 year anniversary. That was in September, October. And so we've been about for a year. Sometimes it feels longer. Sometimes it feels like we only started last month. But it's been a year. And what a year it's been.
What a year it has been.
What a great year to start an organisation.
Absolutely.
Yeah, really just threw ourselves into that one head first. Like,
I mean, it gave us, you know, obviously COVID is not a good thing, but one of the things it actually did for us was it really allowed us to focus in on one of our main aspects that we tried to tackle, which is isolation. Mid Ulster, you know, yourselves, is just a lot of nothing with a couple of towns and some sheep, and that is effectively it. Even like from as far north as where we are here in Jipperstown down as far as 6 Mile Cross, there's nothing. Okay, it's empty. And so a big thing that we try to tackle is isolation, bringing people together from across the entirety of Mid Ulster, and this obviously became a lot more difficult with COVID. So it really helped us. It really made us focus in on a very, very core aspect of our being, which, if it hadn't have been for COVID, would probably have gone overlooked, because as with all organisations in their first year, we sort of get a bit gung-ho about everything, and for a while it just became about the parade.
yeah, it very much was about the parade. And everybody, I think we some people in the committee kind of forgot that
There's a broader remit.
We were a baby organisation. They were kind of having the expectations of like Foyle and Derry, which are big events, and they were having like floats and parties and everything. But I think a lot of people also forget that if you strip Pride right back down to the basics, Pride is protest.
Yep.
And while it's lovely to have the celebration and the parties and the floats, you have to remember the root of where that was. Before I was a wellbeing officer, I was the queer heritage one. So this is all kind of, you know, there was me sitting in the corner being like, okay, but we need to remember that we are trying to fix this, what are we, a county?
Yeah, I mean, a council district.
We're just trying to fix Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So like, that was kind of us and what we are and who we are.
Yeah.
You know.
And it ended up being that our parade, which we ended up having in, where do we have the parade? In was it September? It was September.
we're really great with dates.
Listen, everything's just sort of flown together this
I
year.
think it was September.
It was September because it was supposed to be June,
Yeah.
and then it wasn't.
Yeah.
But we had a very, very, very successful parade. It was all the members of the committee, socially distanced. So like it was to the regulations, which was what, 16 people, 15 people at the regulations at the time. So we just walked in pairs with banners between us, 2 meters apart and 2 meters apart back ways, and with a wonderful fella, Stephen, dressed as an angel of love up the front, holding this big wonderful banner, and we all had these lovely rainbow face coverings modelled here by the lovely Molly. And it was like, and that was through the heart of Cookstown, you know, and Cookstown, not, you know, no offense to anybody from Cookstown, but it's not the most accepting place in the world, you know. It has its issues, but like we just walked straight through the middle of Cookstown, banners held high, heads held high, protesters sitting in the shade trying to have a socially distant protest, but they weren't really. They were on top of one another. But
Yeah. And they were like coming up to us and like giving out things,
flyers, and you know,
and they were just, because they weren't able to speak because they had their masks off. You could really see them struggling, and we were kind of like, sucks to be you, doesn't it?
You know, and getting applause coming down out
Yeah.
of Fairhill, that was
Emotional.
something else.
Yeah,
That was something else.
that was kind of a outer body
Yeah.
experience of sorts where, and my best friend Jake was kind of running along at the footpath because he wasn't in the parade, and he was like, yeah, like the ones that were applauding were saying, you know, fair play to them, and it's so great to see it. And there was a group of girls who followed us from the start to the end, and like I'm really sure they were crying, you know, like it was really, really something else. So that's who we are.
That's who we are.
Making people cry.
How do you think the attitudes towards the LGBT community in Northern Ireland have changed recently?
We had a discussion about this on the way down in the car.
Yeah.
And the answer is disappointing in that in this area it really hasn't.
Yeah.
You know?
It's sad. Because I'm a nerd, I wrote an essay about this for the fun of it. And I kind of was looking at what it is to be queer or LGBT in Northern Ireland. And basically how, you know, if you're still here, you've really like been through some stuff. I myself, me and Josh both have quite different experiences. I moved to university in Derry, and then I moved countries for like a year, and was kind of like, oh my god, there's people that actually accept you for being gay and don't question it. Like I moved to Malta, which is a very, very Catholic country, but very accepting, and like their zebra crossings are rainbows. And I was like, what is this? And I was with one of my friends who's from Malta, and they're like, yeah, it's just a road crossing. And I was like, it's a rainbow.
No, we're from it's not.
It's not where we're from. And he was kind of like,
black and white and nothing.
and he was kind of like talking me through the Maltese history, of which they were the first country to legalize same-sex adoption, same-sex marriage. And so coming back to your question, I think Northern Ireland is a very interesting country to study because it's very deeply, deeply traumatized.
Yeah.
And you can't move forward and look at other perspectives if you're still hung up on stuff that happened before. And it's quite, you can't really say that to a lot of people because you say it and they're kind of like, well, it's our heritage. And you're kind of like, I know it's your heritage, but it's time to look at the future, you know?
I think one thing is that like there's such a divide in Northern Ireland between urban and rural.
Uh-huh.
Like, especially not just Belfast, but say the South Belfast
Yeah.
is so different than Tyrone or
Absolutely.
County Derry or any, Armagh or something.
Yeah.
Absolutely. That's another big thing that plays into it. When you're dealing with rural issues, it's a totally different kettle of fish to dealing with, inner city issues or metropolitan issues or whatever way you want to phrase it. And it does come down to resources. The only support network for LGBT, solely LGBT and queer people in Mid Ulster is us.
Yeah.
And that's a scary prospect. We're only a new organisation. There's only a handful of us trying to get this thing going. But that's the be all and end all of it. There's, Rainbow Project does outreach, and Car Friend and Just Love and everyone, they have outreach programs into Mid Ulster, but there's no one focusing on Mid Ulster geographically.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And you very much need that. You need somebody that is here.
I do a lot of work outside LGBT stuff. I do drama and community building and all this kind of jazz. Work with the council a lot. And it's difficult sometimes. It is difficult. And this is the thing that people need to remember about rural places is that, people say, it's a political divide in Northern Ireland. And, there's so much of a religious divide that people refuse to acknowledge anymore.
Definitely, yeah.
And it's not as prevalent in the city. It's not as prevalent in Belfast. It is prevalent on the North Coast, but any sort of metropolitan area, it's just not as big a deal as the political side of things. But down here, it really, really is. Religion is such a driving factor behind everything.
Definitely.
And because there are certain political parties that take that as a core ethos, then you're left with, you can't have a sensible conversation with a lot of them because their basis for this argument is a book that was written 2,000 years ago by committee in Rome, like generations after the fact. And, you're trying to argue interpretation and trying to argue, the thing was written in Sanskrit to begin with, and then it was translated into Roman, and then it was translated into Latin, and, and then into English by good old King James, when everything was still handwritten before Earl Gutenberg came along with the printing press. How do you deal with... I wouldn't trust myself to write a note to myself and not have a mistake in it. How do we guarantee that the position you're arguing from it has not changed in 2,000 years? And because there are certain political parties that take that so to heart, that almost turns rural Northern Ireland into a kind of theocracy, and which is a ridiculous preposition in the 21st century. If you go to a city and you come out when you're up there, away from family, away from friends that might hold views, and suddenly you're in this wonderful, bright, shiny world, and everyone's beautiful, everyone's lovely. Yeah. There's drink, there's drugs, there's sex everywhere. It's class. It's everything you want as a young person. You've no need to look back at the history of it.
Yeah.
Whereas you're down here,
you don't have
alone.
Yeah.
And you're saying, what is it? You have to find your own version of what it is to be LGBT, to be queer. And because you might not have the influences of people around you, you have to then delve into it by yourself.
How do you think we could sort of unite the urban and rural communities that way? In LGBT, but also like straight communities, sort of especially in rural areas, to try and get them more understanding and more...
This is the thing I've noticed the most, is that nobody wants to sit down and talk. Nobody wants to educate themselves.
I don't think anyone in this country enjoys sitting
No.
down to talk.
No, they don't. Like, this is where the stem of the majority of issues for Northern Ireland has came from, is the fact nobody will sit down and talk. Nobody will sit down to talk to a therapist. Nobody will sit down to talk to a person. They all just shove it down deep inside to themselves and leave it there to fester.
I mean, that's absolutely a hangover of the Troubles.
Yeah.
This hiding who you are, what your views are. Don't, keep to the right side of the street, say none, keep your head down.
It's a case of survival.
Yeah.
Northern Irish people, whether you acknowledge it or not, it's in our DNA, this whole survival instinct of we have to do what we have to do to survive.
One thing we were talking about there is sort of the religion, how much big part religion plays in the north.
Yeah.
One thing religion plays a big part in is schooling still here.
Yeah.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah.
Oh,
Two
God.
two questions. One would be, how do you think that negatively or positively affects the LGBT community? I know what you're going to say that way. Not gonna.
I'm so
And
excited.
and
What needs to
also,
change, basically?
what change do you think you
Yeah.
could do in schooling to sort of make it more acceptable?
We are both little church children. You can go first, because I'll
So,
go on.
I was the epitome of the Dungannon Protestant. I went to the Royal School, and in fact, even more so, I went to the Royal School, the prep department, which is the primary school, and then it closed because not enough people were Protestant enough to go to it, and then I was sent because profound hearing difficulties. My mother and father decided to keep me in a small. It was really I went there because of small class sizes as opposed to a religious angle. But then they decided to send me to the Royal in Armagh, again, small classes, that was the reason. And but both of those schools, the Royal in Dungannon, the Royal in Armagh, are both very Christian schools.
Yeah.
And make no bones about it. And the headmaster in Dungannon at the time, who I knew very, very well from being in the prep, and because he took a very active interest in all areas of the school. And then when I moved back in secondary school, I went back for Form 1. Mr. Hewitt, Paul Hewitt, lovely man. Very, very Christian, very true in his devotion. I never really got to broach the subject of LGBT issues with him because at that point, I had been so convinced by the school and SU, Scripture Union and all those kind of things that what I was feeling wasn't right. And so that, there is me sitting there, and I was a choir boy in the Armagh Church of Ireland Cathedral for years. Choir master Mr. White, lovely, lovely man, the dean at the time, and then I was under Archbishop Eames, of course, lovely fella. I got my surplice from him. But yeah, so I was drenched in religiosity.
Yeah.
And, but again, it wasn't sort of anything that I never thought I had. There was always something separating me from what I thought was true religion. There was always some barrier that I could sense between where I was and where I wanted to be religiously. And then it took me a very long time to realize that what that barrier was in fact a nice, supple young gentleman lying on a boudoir. That's what the barrier was. And, when I was in secondary school, when I was deciding what I wanted to move on and do with my life, as we all do, I was genuinely contemplating going into Presbyterian ministry.
One thing very interesting is both of you seem brought up in quite religious backgrounds, and both of you seem to have a bit of religiosity still in you.
And I don't.
I do.
You
He
do.
doesn't.
I don't.
All right, well, I'm not religious, but it's very interesting just to get this subject. How do you think being a Christian and gay and openly gay, how do you think that works in society, sort of, how do you think that...
It's so hit and miss.
Yeah.
Some people are very, very accepting of it. And some people are like, God, you're repellent.
Yeah.
You're disgusting. You're the scum of the earth. And you're like, okie dokie, that makes a fun Monday morning conversation.
Yeah.
Something I've experienced from whenever I was a bit younger. Once again, I was in rural area and stuff like that. I always felt isolated. There was no help nearby and stuff like that. I got to the point where in my head I was like, do I have to move to the city or do I want to move country altogether to find somewhere else?
Yeah.
And I did end up doing that. I ended up finished college. I went to uni and it was so much better.
Yeah.
Just for like other people like myself, is that really necessary to do? Or, is there anything?
We were actually talking about this in the car on the way out.
We come to a depressing conclusion.
We came to a depressing conclusion that it can be necessary to do that.
Yeah.
It's very, very sad that that's the case.
Okay.
But you're not going to be able to help people or be able to have these sorts of conversations until you have what. But it's not even for LGBT people.
No.
I would say this to everybody, to go and live in a different city and live in a different country and experience other people's culture.
That was my reason for it.
Like,
Yeah.
Malta for me was a huge life-changing experience for so many reasons. Some were very, very bad, but it was nothing to do with LGBT stuff. It was just because I started dating a person. But anyway, I experienced their culture, and it made me look at how I deal with people very differently.
Yeah.
And how I articulate myself, because obviously they don't speak English. So like, you can't ship up to them and be like, well, what's the crack? You have to really like articulate yourself and be polite and be nice. And I just think you're not going to get anywhere or understand things until you have an outside perspective, until you're standing looking in, and take that time to really reflect and be like, they can do this, but I can't do this where I'm from. Where's the root cause of this problem? And it's painful. Oh, that was a horrible
Although,
noise.
do you think that the culture is moving in Northern Ireland in the right direction?
The answer is yes and no.
Yes.
And unfortunately, the answer is rural and metropolitan. Again, Belfast, for a lot of the places, couldn't give a shit whether you're gay, straight, bi, pan, whatever. Derry, much of the same for the most part.
yeah.
For the most part.
I'm Jake. I'm the Queer Heritage Officer for MUP, which stands for Mid Ulster Pride, Ireland's first rural pride committee. My role in the committee is basically looking into and documenting the rather whitewashed queer heritage that is actually in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland as a whole has a history that's been predominantly written by others and predominantly written by, well, the viewpoint predominantly written from quite a negative standpoint. And basically my job in the committee is basically to find the small amounts of history that are documented and are kept that have significance to the queer community that resides still in rural Ireland. Because as a committee as a whole, the job is really to bring awareness and a sense of like community to like people of all ages who are part of the LGBTQI community and just feel a bit isolated, which is natural when you're in a country that's still healing and still progressing.
What are the main issues being facing the LGBTQ community in North?
It's kind of hard to put the perspective across of what it's like to grow up in a society that's predominantly heterosexual, and heterosexuality is the normality. And trying to just find that community when you're younger, it is very, very hard, really, really hard. And it's kind of one of them things that when you are younger, the reason why I think people do flock to places like Belfast is a case of people don't hate where they come from, and some people like me will eventually just gotta leave it. But it's there's just a lot of safety, and again, community. Like, humans were social creatures, and like the basic needs that everyone has is really simple. You want validation, you want to be heard. You really just every now and again, you just want like someone that you know comes from the same place as you, just to like give you a little pat on the back and be like, I understand what it's like. And that's just, it's pretty much impossible to get in rural areas because there's still a lot of traditional stigmas and fears, and a lot of that really stems from like generational opinions brought down that had never been challenged because they've never had to challenge them. And things like traditional views on religion as a big factor as well, because it kind of fuels traditional stigmas that have never been challenged. But like once they're challenged, and I mean, I don't even know if once they're challenged, you kind of realize it doesn't matter. Like no one's really causing any harm. But trying to get that message across and break down that barrier is probably the hardest thing. And it's just something that a young person by themselves trying to figure themselves out just shouldn't have to do. You know, it shouldn't be every single queer person's job to educate the older generation, you know, and so it comes down to things like rural pride that have that part of playing the role of educating the older generation and even the younger generation. Some of the younger generation are still being brought up with these ideals, which then be brought into high schools and stuff like that, and that promotes the bullying and stuff, which again is changing, getting better, but it's quite a slow process. But I think, yeah, the difference really is in them larger cities that there is the community, because it's a city is a notion. It's not a city is a physical place, but more than anything, a city is there's the idea of a community. And when a lot of people have the same idea of where a community can be built, they will build it in that place. Yeah. And the city just kind of stands for that. It's really traditional. I mean, you look at places like, I think a really traditional example and one of the oldest is Soho in London. It's just a street in a huge, huge city, but it became a community just because, and it's a street like any other, but the reason it became a community is literally because all these people from all around the UK had the same notion and were like, we're going to build this community for us, it's safe. And now it's gentrified and it's overpriced and no one can live there unless we are worth millions. But at the start, that's what it was. And yeah, I think that's what Belfast and Derry promise over a rural community. I still miss home and I miss all the friends that I have at home. And like, it's a beautiful, like Ireland is a gorgeous landscape, but the I still have great memories living there, but the memories I have at Ireland are tinted, because like it is very, very hard, because it is very isolating. And again, that's kind of one of the reasons why, even though I'm in Glasgow, I was really promoted to join MUP, because like it's such a great opportunity to educate people back home and like build a community that I didn't have, and most people don't. Most people in MUP still don't have, and are trying to work through. And it kind of hurts, but like it's going to be so worth it if it's made.
There's a good couple of points you brought up. One, two, actually, I was thinking of. But first of all, we were talking a lot about sort of like, you're talking about religion, and of course, Ireland as a whole, but North especially, is one of the most religious places in Western Europe. How do you think like religion, like in schools and things, affects sort of the experience LGBT people have when they're growing up?
The school system in general is still in the shadow of Thatcherism, essentially. I'm not sure if you know, Thatcher basically placed a law that stated that homosexuality couldn't be taught in schools. And that law, it's very outdated and it's disappeared, but its shadow is still there. And you're right, schools are very religious. Even when a school is like a very public school and isn't even a grammar or private, the element of religion is still there. I didn't even go to a school that wasn't even advertised as religious, but it was very religious. Most of my tutors were Christian, and I had a teacher. She was fired a few years after I left for homophobic remarks directly to a pupil. But she used to give me I'm not going to put it, but she used to give me a really hard time, because I was so obviously, I was the only boy with like a satchel, like a cross satchel, and I had a little bracelet, and I had all this shit. Like I was so obvious. And I didn't do PE. They couldn't make me do PE. Like I didn't do PE for 3 years straight. But like you're right, like religion as a whole playing in schools. I think religion moves and evolves in some of those beautiful ways. And I've met a lot of ministers around the UK that have opened up their churches and are far more accepting. But again, I think like Northern Ireland as a country really relies on stability, and it's looking for stability because it hasn't had it in 100 years. And religion, being such an established and old way, can really come as a comfort, because it doesn't feel like it's going anywhere. And when you're looking for that, you're really going to stick, and some people will just really stick to the old rules, and them old rules really do enforce quite homophobic ways, which if the teachers are bringing it in, so the pupils are going to pick it up. And you see that. I'm not sure what schools you went to. You probably know a good couple of examples of like religious teachers and students being inspired by that, and they themselves, and they pick up the traditional ideas of religion from their teacher. Like we all witness it, and some experience it. And I don't think religion's bad, but I do think the traditional mindset of which way religion is taught in schools can be very damaging.
Could you sort of ever see yourself maybe coming home then?
So I'm just going to be a little bit vulnerable for a sec. But so basically I usually get the boat back because it's cheap. Also, I can carry so much crap with me, and but sometimes take a flight, and usually I have to bring like the amount of ointments, oils, and like pills, because I'll have panic attacks prior to coming back to Ireland because I'm so scared of it. But once I'm here and I see the community, like all my friends and the community of people I've built around me, like the safe space that I've built, I'm fine, and I love it. And it's kind of like and like the nostalgia kicks in, and you're with your mates, and like you're all doing you're going back to your local, and you go into your friend's living room again, and you're all just watching and that's great, and I love that. And it kind of gets to the point where I have to, about 2 weeks in usually, and I'll remember that this is the reason why this felt so good. It's because like a holiday, and I'm still not ready to live in Northern Ireland again, because although I'm so thankful and lucky for the people I have around me, and including the people that are in Mid Ulster Pride. Like Molly is one of my oldest friends from high school, and we kind of went through it together. And then I've met like some great people in the community who I wouldn't have had the opportunity to meet without it. Like the chairman and like Josh and stuff like that. I think he's great, and started talking to the Reverend Andrew, and he's a great form of representation. I don't think I'm personally ready yet to come back to Northern Ireland, and I would love in the future to someday come back and feel comfortable enough to stay long term. At the present moment in time, I think I'm going to reside in Glasgow and work and be in Ireland and like visit Ireland as much as possible, because it's still great. But I just can't live there permanently yet. There's just not the social structure, because there's a huge difference between living entirely in a queer safe space, and the difference of when you're outside of that queer space and you're in your flat and you're like you're already like you're dressed a bit mad, and you kind of need to go to Tesco to get a thing of milk. You want to feel safe getting that thing of milk. And I think there's a lot of people in Ireland that can really recognize that, and especially, and it's not even the queer, like this is from my perspective as like, a queer male who'll wear a ball gown to go get a thing of milk from Tesco, but like, but yeah, I think there's a lot of people that I think there's a lot of people that don't think you have to be queer to kind of recognize that kind of idea of safety. Yeah. What's interesting is how professional the politicians are when it comes to their own opinions, which is not ever done in Northern Ireland. The politics in Northern Ireland is literally about as professional as like a primary 5 class doing doing a Christmas musical. It is woeful. We all saw on Instagram over lockdown the amount of videos about when the Black Lives Matter movement came about again, because this wasn't the first time. And we saw all the things about trans representation, and we saw all the things about global warming, and everyone freaked out and everyone panicked. But you can't and people then get scared of the topic, but you can't have a conversation with the video that's being shown to you on your phone, because you're showing something that you don't understand and you fear. And when you fear that, you're going to repel it because, you're scared of it. But once again, because once the conversation is had and people are open up to the conversation, it's less scary because they understand. And then when people understand that perspective, they then develop over time a sense of where they are in that perspective. Does that make sense? Yeah. And then that's really it. And then that's just how it keeps going. So, and I think again, that's another thing that differs from Northern Ireland to here is people aren't afraid to have that conversation, but people are still so scared of having it back home. And this is including some of my close friends who are kind of working through their own trauma, and family members that I have that aren't exactly accommodating, but they're not horrible. And that's just how, but I think that's just a huge thing that's different. And again, that completely relates to politically, because at the end of the day, politics, it's run by people. It's people in power, like the people in power. Not all of them, a majority of them come from affluent and well-educated backgrounds, but like there's still MPs and stuff like that who come from working class areas, and like us that you can still able to have them conversations with. But it's just, at the end of the day, two-person game. You have to be willing to listen. And I think that's, so many people aren't willing to listen because so many people just don't want to be challenged.
Is there anything else you'd like to say? Sort of any advice or information you want to give to people that are watching?
I think although there's great representation in Northern Ireland, and I'd say look out for it, and any charities or anything that go and give you support, not even financially, just even for Mid Ulster Pride, MUP, follow us on Instagram, just see what we're up to. That's like, don't even need like financial, it's just like the support of like people. Same for like any other charities going on back home. I think there's a lot of people that think the input doesn't make a difference, but everyone's input makes such a huge difference, and no one should ever feel that whatever they do doesn't have an impact. Everyone's existence and whatever everyone does makes a small impact on something else. We're all part of like a society and and if we all get involved and like embrace change, so many good things will come out of it. And like change can be really scary, but as long as it's going in the right direction, and it's not a graph where the line just goes straight up, it just goes up and down, and like that's just how it works. But yeah, I just say for anyone listening, they'll give us a like on Facebook as well. But just try any other small organizations going ahead. Just give them the support, give them a like, give them a little message. Show up to the events if you can. If you're isolating or whatever, just reach out, and you're feeling a bit down, don't be afraid to reach out to any of them, because they're all there to help. No one's in this alone, no matter where you are. No one's ever alone. It's impossible to be alone when you're human. We're such social creatures. Everyone loves to talk. Sure, listen to me. I've been talking for ages, non-stop.
Thank you very much for coming on call with us and talking with us and going over everything. It's massively appreciated.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a great opportunity, and I'm really glad that you're having these kind of podcasts and stuff like this and recording this stuff, because this is the kind of stuff that's needed. So I'm very good from Mid Ulster Pride and stuff like that, and everyone involved, and like from I'll represent Glasgow for a little bit, and from the people of Glasgow, and like the University of Glasgow, we say thank you.
I think that's it.
Thank you very much.